Okay, so we have Daniel. Daniel has some historical material in it, obviously. All the visions in Daniel go down to the same point. Daniel, the writer, doesn't know anything about what happens after that point. He doesn't know about Charlemagne. Doesn't know about Joe Stalin. He doesn't know about Abraham Lincoln. He doesn't know about the Mikado or Sun Yat-sen or the Eskimos or the Pygmies or the Bushmen or the Aborigines or Sitting Bull or Red Cloud or Custer or whoever. He only knows up to the coming of Alexander and something after that. And it stops with his picture of always this wretched person, Antiochus Epiphanes, as we'll find out from other texts, that this one seems the 11th horn. So when Alexander died in 323 BC, we did a little bit of that previously, but Alexander is an easy one to stick the dates in, as we said last time. He came to the Middle East in 333. After a lot of over-campaigning, he died of exhaustion, poison, wounds, something in 323. He was only, as we said last time, his early 30s. So then his kingdom is split up into 4 parts, which is why we get the 4 winds of heaven here. Greece, Asia Minor doesn't interest us too much in this class. It's what's in the Middle East and Egypt that is of interest for us. However, that Lex Cornelia that I just erased, in English that is the Cornelia, Publius Cornelius Scipio. Lex is law, the law of bodily mutilations, sicarius with a knife. Bodily meaning castration or circumcision and other things like that. The law forbidding that in the Roman Empire. So castration was considered to be a bodily mutilation of some kind. So for instance, sicarius in that terminology, as we later find in early church literature, is someone who had purposely castrated himself or done something of that kind. Talking about early church fathers, just since I erased that, but anyway, Jerome was always not kind to his predecessors. Origen is in the 3rd century, Jerome is in the 4th and 5th century. He said Origen castrated himself out of zeal, if you like, but not the right kind of zeal. In other words, he's following something in the New Testament, make yourself a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven or something like that, that Jesus says. And so Jerome pours abuse on Origen, who he considers to be a sicarius. The reason I'm interested in that is that the Sicarii, in our history that we're going to get to in Palestine, are considered by Josephus the knife people, the assassins. And I'm going to try to argue by the end of this course that maybe they may not just, that's pejorative. I'm sure that they didn't consider themselves to be assassins, terrorists, and so on. They considered themselves to be, they didn't call themselves this. But they may have been called that too after some sort of circumcision aspect to their activities, which is what I'm going to try to argue, because I think In fact, that law of Sicarius bans circumcision among Jews after the two uprisings, 166 to 70 and 132 to 136. So I put it up there because of Publius Cornelius Scipio, but I think it'll be interesting for the end of our course. In any event, to go back to this history then, we're going to find in the Maccabean period, in fact, people who stopped circumcising themselves. Now, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't circumcise yourself. I don't have any course in this squabble. I used to teach an Islam course here, and we used to do poetry, and one of the poems said, when this fellow didn't want to part in the conflict, he said, I have no he camel or she camel in it. I have no he camel or she camel in this particular argument. The same for the order of the Gospels, or whether John is later or earlier. I have no he camel or she camel in it. Let those who want to argue about those things argue about those things. That's interesting to keep people active. And a lot of other things people argue about. Anyway, so I don't have a he camel or she camel on whether Paul's right or he isn't right. I don't really care. I'm more of a Paulist than not, since I behave like Paul. I mean, I don't follow the law. I have to admit that. I eat lobster and shrimp and meat with blood in it and all that kind of stuff. I don't eat a lot of pork, but I'm sure if someone put it on my plate, I probably would eat it. You know, I eat ham and stuff. I like bacon and things. So, you know, I'm a Paulinist. I just don't like his attitude. You know, I don't like him as a person. So what I mean, I have no he camel or she camel in it. I have nothing in this squabble. I just call it the way it strikes me, that this is somebody who's very slippery and is quite cynical and makes arguments for his own benefit, which are a little bit, I don't know the right word, but can't think of offhand. Anyway. Superficial, perhaps. Okay, so now the empire is divided into, and we care about the Seleucids because of the one general Seleucus. Here's the empire. I'm not doing very well here. Okay, so this is the Mediterranean, Italy, Greece, and so on, Asia Minor, land of splendor, Syria, Persia, Iraq today also, and so on. TJ, not TJ Maxx, Transjordan. No, T1, okay. Jordan, Egypt. So, okay, these are two parts of Alexander, but this is one part here. We'll call the Seleucids, after the general Seleucus, and this is the other part here, the Ptolemies. So for a while, first 100 years after Alexander, the Ptolemies are stronger. But as the 200s wear on, the Seleucids get more of the upper hand. And they do come through Palestine to invade Egypt. And that's where the Maccabee books pick up. Because on their way back from the Egyptian campaign, and the king, it's not an emperor, is Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, some people like to call him Antiochus, and I call him Antiochus only because of the word Antioch in Syria. I pronounce Antioch, Antioch, so to me, Antiochus rolls off my tongue better than Antiochus. I can't say Antiochus Epiphanes, it just doesn't work, but probably the proper pronunciation is Antiochus, although I wasn't alive at that time. I can't vouch for that. Antiochus will do. It's easier for me. I can live with it. You can do whatever you now we're in a testing area that we should know this data. So this is stuff you should be responsible for. I'm not going to test you verbally, so you don't have to pronounce any of this stuff. So the Ptolemies are after the general Ptolemy, who was a boyhood friend of Alexander. And we did last time that Cleopatra was the last queen of the Ptolemies, and she and Caesar got it on together. And then Antony wanted to get in the same bed there. And look at the series Rome for the first year if you want to keep abreast of all those bedroom scenes, blue movies, upstairs, downstairs, Roman style, Egyptian style. Pretty good. By the same writers as wrote Patton and stuff. But the second season is a real plus. Don't. Second season, obviously, they fell out. Someone else wrote it. Okay, you can get that on HBO if you want to look at it. It covers this period a bit. So, apparently there are 10 kings down to this Antiochus Epiphanes who has the campaign into Egypt. So he would be the 11th king. So let's look at, by the way, you just don't know a lot of information about the 300s. See, when there's no biblical books, no important information, 200s to preserve, we just don't have the information we have. Josephus is one of our best sources. I mean, the Romans don't give us a lot of information about the 200s either. And we just don't have the material about the 200s. There's some in the Antiquities of Josephus, but I don't think that's very detailed. So after it describes Alexander and Maccabees won, he took many campaigns, gained possessions, fortresses, local kings. This sounds like the Habakkuk commentary right here. So you say, oh, it's Alexander in the Habakkuk commentary. Well, it could be, but we don't think it is. But that's the only one other person it could resemble. But he wasn't as cruel as the Romans. I mean, he actually wanted to have a cosmopolitan world. He wanted his generals to marry Oriental wives. He wasn't executing all kinds of people. He was conciliating populations. So, you know, he wasn't doing anything like the Habakkuk commentary presents. He wasn't a vicious, brutal thug like the Roman generals and emperors were. That's why people who praise Rome, I mean, amaze me. Because there's nothing praiseworthy in those really brutal, inhuman rulers that were succeeded one after the other that you can read about in Suetonius, as I told you. 12 Caesars. I mean, they're just, maybe Augustus was a little bit, even he was quite a little bit sophisticated, but all the others were just thugs and, you know, brutes. Most of them, all the generals that succeeded, very little nobility in any of them. Later, maybe Trajan a little bit, or Hadrian, they try to say, but these people had no mercy on people who opposed them at all. Okay, so the earth grew silent before him, and his ambitious heart swelled with pride. This starts where all the visions in Daniel start. He assembled powerful forces, subdued provinces, nations, princes. Sounds like what I read you in the Habakkuk commentary, I admit. Anyway, he didn't farm out his taxes, so that's different from what we have in the Habakkuk commentary. By the time Alexander took to his bed and he was dying, he summoned his comrades and divided his kingdom among them while he was still alive. I can't vouch for that. He reigned 12 years, then he died. Each aspired to his own region, assumed crowns after his death. They and their heirs after them for many years brought increasing evils into the world. I'm going to sort of read a lot of this out loud just so you get it. I know you've read it. If your translation is different from mine, that's okay. If it's just a word or something, don't worry about it. If it's really something really different, then certainly ask about it. Obviously, every translation is going to differ, because they wouldn't publish it otherwise. They would be accused of plagiarism. You know, so the translator has to put different words in. So if you say, well, my words are different, well, they better be different, or the guy will say, you've stolen my translation. So, you know, it's got to be different. But you can basically see if it's the same, more or less, meaning. So this is pretty good. They all had crowns, and they brought increasing evil into the world. Well, we get the point here. Does this book like any of these people? No. Does the Habakkuk Pesher like any of these people? No. Do any of these people represent anything good? No. So this is why I'm so big in trying to show you what the struggle against Hellenization was. Now maybe you say, these people are foolish. Why are they struggling against this wonderful, beautiful Grecian Hellenistic mix that we're getting here? Lovely stories about gods and goddesses, beautiful bodies, oiling them all up for games and everything, you know, competing naked, wrestling, all this, having gymnasiums. Sure, it's really elegant. I'm not against it. I think it's, I'm not big on naked bodies, wrestling in oil, skin, and all that stuff. But, you know, I don't think the way the Middle East is today, where people are wrapped in clothes so much you can hardly even see them, and they go down to the beach and the women can't even get out of their burqas or something like that. I don't think that's any better than the Hellenists, you know. So, I mean, some happy medium may be in there. So I'm not advocating one or the other. But this book doesn't like them. And it particularly doesn't like, guess who? Antiochus Epiphanes. That's line 10. See it? From these grew a sinful offshoot. Doesn't that sound like Daniel? Yeah, it's the same. It's the same. It's the same spirit as Daniel. The same description, more or less. Antiochus Epiphanes. That's how we more or less know Daniel is a Maccabean era book. Someone asked me, what are the Hasmoneans? It's a fancy name for the Maccabees. The ancestor of the Maccabees at one point is called Hasmoneans. So in scholarly academic books, a lot of people like to call them Hasmoneans in some of the in academic literature. But you know, Maccabee is really Judas's nickname, Judas the Hammerer. But you know, you can call them Hasmoneans if you feel it's more pleasurable to you, or Maccabees, whatever you find is better. Anyway, he was a son of King Antiochus, once a hostage in Rome. He became king in 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks, which according to what I have on my footnotes is about 175 BC. And then he came, in Israel, some backsliders, traitors, renegades, so on, led many people astray. And the Dead Sea Scrolls like that language, leading astray. The liar in the Dead Sea Scrolls leads many astray, says the Damascus Document, column 1. Come, they said, let us reach an understanding with the pagans. I don't want to be cruel and overdo it, but I have to just note that this is basically what Paul does in his accommodation, reaches an understanding with the pagans, if you like. And so that is why a teacher of that kind might be described as leading many astray. Because he does, the reason circumcision is important, not to emphasize it, as I said, or to advocate it one way or the other, make people feel better or worse when they have or don't have it, is because it's the sign of the covenant. In the Old Testament, it's the sign of the covenant. It means you took the covenant on yourself. You say, what a dumb way to take a covenant on yourself. You have to cut your foreskin off or something like that. Okay, rationally, intellectually, it might seem silly. But rational intellectual is one thing. What makes an impression on time and history is another thing. When you do something like that, people take it very seriously. Sort of like, you know, tattooing or putting a hole in your tongue or something like that, you know. People never forget having done those kinds of things to themselves. So when you've taken something as serious as the covenant upon yourself, and that being the sign of the covenant, that will make an impression. Spinoza said he thought that the Jewish people would have survived the war for that alone. In his writings, he said that. He's probably right, though the Jews were not the only ancient people that circumcised. The Egyptians did. I think the Jews may have gotten it from the Egyptians. The Muslims still do. Only thing that the Jews do it on the 8th day, according to traditional usage, whereas the Muslims do it often by the age of 13. I've been to circumcisions of Muslims in Palestine at the age of 13, and let me tell you, it is not a pleasant experience to see the poor guy there lying inside the house, almost dead. That's all I can tell you. Give the Jews credit for that. I mean, I think the 8th day, the baby maybe is feeling pain, but nobody else is feeling any pain, and so and the baby quickly forgets it. So I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying probably the 8th day is a little more rational. I'm not saying civilized or uncivilized, just a little more rational. You do something about the age of 13, I wouldn't recommend it. I'm telling you that. Okay. So it's to take the sign of the covenant. That is what it is. So the people are preaching circumcision. As it turned out, modern days we've seen that there may be some medicinal positive aspects to it because of AIDS and other things like that. It turns out that obviously if you're less in a situation where you can protect germs and so on in a physical sensitive place, you're going to be more open to infection of different kinds. So it has turned out that it has some positive aspects, and they've talked about, in fact, in Africa, how important it would be to circumcise everybody because it would bring the AIDS rate apparently down. I saw some estimates, I don't know exactly how much, but something like 80%, something like that among men. I can't speak for the women side of it, but it's a huge what do you call it, diminution. And you know, I think a lot of those practices, you think that they're just symbolic or religious. Often they were the experience of centuries. You know, when you didn't have plumbing and things like that, or showers, or you know, you're out in the desert someplace. You know, the bodily parts that are sensitive areas are very difficult to keep clean and open to infection in a much more massive manner than other areas of your body. Like, I'm not going to get an infection here on my forearm much, unless a mosquito bites me or something, or a spider. But there are other areas of the body that you will get infections. So I think probably in the early life of primitive man, they found some benefit to this. I'm sure that's how it grew up. Then I think the Hebrews took it over. This is my theory. I'm not provable. I can't prove this. They took it over and made it into a symbolic act. So they made a taboo out of something that was maybe useful and probably recommendable in those health circumstances at that time. Now, it turns out it has some benefits in the modern time in that one area that I spoke about. Blood. We now find that blood is a very frightening thing. Every dentist, everyone are wearing gloves. Everyone, you know, people are afraid to touch your teeth or anything like that. You go into hospitals, people are like covered over with latex, you know, and so on. The Jews had a ban on blood, you know. They would put women in their periods out of the camp, you know. Okay, oh, that's against feminism. I don't think it was a matter of feminism or anything like that. They wouldn't have sexual intercourse in the menstrual period and things like that. I have a feeling that that comes from very old traditional practices. But I don't know, I'm just saying, I don't think it's just superstition, you know, I don't think it was just superstition. There is ancient practices that come down through, you know, the experiences of a culture. They say, oh, well, we're finding if we do this, we're not getting sick. And we're going to see that those people over there who aren't doing this are getting sick, you know, so they're banning things like homosexuality and things like that. I'm not saying that, you know, homosexuality should be banned or not banned, but they had a really huge animus against the surrounding peoples, the Canaanites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, because these were the things that they saw around them that they considered to be unclean, I suppose, is how they would put it. So now our modern world has inherited some of those things in the Judeo-Christian tradition. I'm not advocating or not advocating, but I am saying that at that time, in a more less sophisticated, I mean, everyone didn't have a shower in their house. You didn't have bars of soap that you buy at the supermarket. You were living basically in a filthy universe. And sexual intercourse was probably one of the quickest ways to transmit and get disease of any other kind, as it is still. So, I mean, they were very scrupulous and superstitious about that. That's all that I would say. So I'm not advocating circumcision for or against, but it was for them the sign of the covenant, and they made a taboo out of it. So again, the Egyptians practiced, lots of other peoples practiced. Okay, so, and a number of people eagerly, they wanted to reach understanding with the pagans. For since we separate ourselves from them, many misfortunes have overtaken us. Remember the scrolls? Separate yourselves from the children of the pit, including your own people, not just other people's, but your own people. Go out in the wilderness, live a totally pure existence. Make a straight way in the wilderness, prepare a way for your God. Come, they said, let us reach understanding. This proposal proved acceptable, and a number of people eagerly approached the king, who authorized them to practice pagan observances. So they built a gymnasium, there we go. Everyone was oiling up, getting into it, such as the pagans have, disguised their circumcision. There's the big deal right there, right from the get-go, in terms of what we've been talking about. Again, that's abandon the Holy Covenant. The two are connected. You disguise circumcision, you abandon the Holy Covenant. Submitting to heathen rule and being willing slaves of impiety. Those are pretty tough charges. So this book is really big on these charges of what the backsliders and the renegades, whatever you want to call them, are doing. I bring back the Dead Sea Scroll studies. In normative Dead Sea Scroll studies, the Maccabees are considered the wicked priests who are abolishing the law and this kind of thing. It is so preposterous, it is so stupid, it is so abysmally ignorant. I wrote my first book, Maccabees, Zadokites, Christians, and Qumran, criticizing that proposition. But you will hear, again, one after the other, of the people who conform to the reigning hypothesis, the reigning theories, parrot the same proposition. One or another of the Maccabees were the wicked priests. No, they were not. The Herodian priests were the wicked priests. The Herodian priests appointed by the Herodian family and the Roman Empire, they were the wicked priests in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That is, and the reason they get this Maccabees is the dating again. So, you can also bring that point up should you ever wish to. It's preposterous when the scrolls are totally for the law, totally against everything we have that the Maccabee books are against, then to turn it around and say that these people are, against the Maccabean family. No, they're not against the Maccabean family. The scrolls are later than the Maccabean period. Not all the scrolls in the sense that some of the Enoch and some of Jubilees and some of the classical documents that they preserve there, but all the sectarian documents are later. 1st century BC, after the coming of the Romans and the Herodians. We'll get to that presently. So this is the big deal here. So, and here's another big thing, submitting to heathen rule. You can't submit to foreign rule. Now, I think in Deuteronomy it says, you shall not put a foreigner over you. That's part of the Mosaic Law. Rabbinic Judaism doesn't observe that. The Dead Sea Scrolls does observe that. Does observe that. In other words, they feel that, their arguments with the Pharisees, who are the progenitors of Rabbinic Judaism as we know it, not all the Rabbinic people were like that. Akiba and some of the others were obviously not like that, but a lot of the others were willing to live with foreign rule. The scrolls paid the price of not being willing to live with foreign rule because they were observing the law to the absolute letter. And they paid the price of observing the law to the absolute letter. I have a lot of people in the class from different backgrounds, so I'm trying to make it comprehensible with all the different backgrounds as we go along. So in the temple scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that commandment from Deuteronomy is repeated. You shall not put a foreigner over you. Many people think that the so-called temple scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls that was found after the Six-Day War in someone's garden in Bethlehem where the Antiquities dealer had buried it, which is a huge document, something like 61 columns. Many people think that's a sixth book of the law because it is given with God, Yahweh, or whoever you want to call it, speaking in the first person. You know, I said this, I said that, I said this, and so on and so forth. So many people consider that the scroll people thought of it as a sixth book of the law. It has materials about the temple and how the temple service was to be conducted, but that's not all it has. It's got a lot of other law things, including thou shalt not put a foreigner over you. And it also bans niece marriage, which Rabbinic Judaism accepts. So there are things in the temple scroll that are against Pharisaic Judaism. And that's the different kinds of Judaism we had in that period. So that could have been, you know, the law of the scroll community and so on, put in the first person in the name of God. But this submitting to foreign rule, I submit, in the scrolls, we have a name that we all think it's the Pharisees. It's called the Seekers After Smooth Things. It's in several scroll documents, particularly the Habakkuk Pesher, commentary on the prophet Nahum. Seekers after smooth things. Now, in rabbinic normative Judaism, halachot are legal traditions that are represented by the Talmudic presentation of what came after the Old Testament, including the Old Testament. Halachot, which is why Jews call the law of Moses halakha. Halakha is the normal word for Mosaic law with the additions of rabbinic law. Halakha is really actually means, based on the word go, holek, to go, the going, the way. It's a kind of another word for way. Anyway, it's also legal traditions. To seek out new traditions based on rabbinic lines of transmission. So in the scrolls we have seekers after smooth things, halakot. And most people think that's a play on what the Pharisee teachers were doing, building a fence around the Torah, as they call it, seeking halakot. They wouldn't honor this activity with the name halachot. They like to make a pun on it, calling it halakot, making the rough things smooth. One of the rough things that I think they made smooth was not putting a foreigner over you. This group would not agree to put a foreigner over you. So this group was bound to come in collision with the Roman Empire. I'm stupid or whatever, they were bound, they would never apply, cynically or otherwise, the most precious prophecy of the Jewish people, the Messianic prophecy, to the Roman destroyer of Jerusalem and the temple. Their tongue would stick to the roof of their mouth before they would do such a cynical activity. They would never do it. And that is the difference between halachot and halakot in their view. I'm not saying that they're right or wrong, I'm just saying these people are, you say, fanatics. They're not realists, not pragmatists. Yeah, no, they're not. They're living in some spaced out heavenly sort of universe. That's quite impressive, you see, and that we have their literature. So the point is that these seekers, I think that the seekers after Holocaust are not just Pharisaic party, and Judaism will get to who the Pharisees are, but also Pauline Christians. In my view, because Paul says he was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. He studied at the feet of Pharisees. He was a student of Gamaliel, and so on and so forth. He sees himself as a Pharisee of the Pharisees. And I think that that code is also attacking people like that. That's why I can only call Paul, because he's written the stuff, therefore we can identify him. How many other people are so clearly, you know, from the first century who have expressed themselves in as open a way. You say, what about some other people? Well, we just don't have a lot of writings that we can so clearly point to that. So, okay, so I think that the points are not what rabbinic circles would call pilpul, little arguments about small legal detail. It's about big overarching points of the law. These are the things that are the halakot that they're talking about. Submission to foreign rule, foreign appointment of high priests, niece marriage, divorce. None of these things were recognized at Qumran, and they are recognized in Judaism as we know. Foreign appointment of high priest was a very big thing. How do I know this? It's not stated anywhere. I can see it in the materials. But that's what they were bugged about, if you want to use a popular expression. That's what they were concerned about. Those big things. And not the little things. And that's what's being concerned here. Submitting to foreign rule and willing slaves of impiety. Just the opposite of Galatians 4, where you are a son of the slave woman if you observe the law, Paul says. You're a son of the free woman if you don't. And the slave woman is Sinai, Hagar and Sinai, and so on and so forth. He makes it quite clear what he's talking about. So this is just, I use it because what I want to show is that we've got 2 centuries of struggle against this submitting to foreign rule, Hellenization, and then, of course, after the Roman destruction of everything in 7 AD, all these things come into being. All these things come into being because these groups lose. These groups lose, right or wrong. I mean, it was inevitable, you could say. Okay. Now, once Antiochus had established his authority, he determined to make himself king of Egypt. So that's how he came down into Palestine. And then he advanced on Israel and Jerusalem after his conquest. They say he conquered Egypt. I don't think he did. But he conquered. He obviously plundered some of it. And he came back. He probably had to pay his army. He turned about, advanced in Israel and Jerusalem in massive strength, line 21, 23. Instantly breaking into the temple, removed the golden altar and lampstand. So he wanted all the rich stuff, the same as Titus did on the Arch of Titus. Took the lampstand, the golden altar, with all its fitting, together with all these other things: loaves, offering, libations, cups, golden saucers, veil, crowns, golden decoration from the front of the temple, stripped everything to melt it down. He made off with gold, silver, precious vessels, secret treasures, seized them, and left everything in shambles. Okay? In his arrogance. There was deep mourning in Israel. 2 years went by, and then the king sent a representative, line 29, to Jerusalem, addressing them with peaceful words, gaining their confidence, but then dealing it a terrible blow, pillaging the city, setting it on fire, tore down houses, took women and children hostage, commandeered the cattle. Then he fortified the city of David, the high point in the city, with a great wall, and installed an army of sinful men. And they looted everything, etc., etc., etc. It was great trouble. And they shed innocent blood in the temple. Anyway, everyone fled. The citizens fled. And the temple of Jerusalem became a place of strangers. Her sanctuary became deserted as a wilderness. Now, do I believe all this? Well, I may be exaggerated, but I don't see any reason to quibble with it. There's nothing here that's supernatural or surprising, particularly so unless you have counterindicative evidence. We know the point of view. The point of view is against what's happening. We could write it from for what's happening, but the basic, what happened is probably pretty close to what happened. He wanted the whole kingdom to become a single people and renouncing peculiar customs, line 42. All the pagans conformed to his decree, like Alexander wanted, and many Israelites chose to accept sacrifice to idols, profaning the Sabbath. That's another one in James' instructions to oversee community things sacrificed to idols. The Sabbath was broken, and so on and so forth. Adopting foreign customs, defiling the temple, sacred precincts, building altars, sacrificing pigs and other unclean animals, leaving their children uncircumcised, prostituting themselves. Oh, this might be overstated, but anyway, it's how they see it. All kinds of impurity. They forgot the law and revoked the observance of it. Many became apostates. Then on the 15th of Chislev, in the year 145, the king erected the abomination of the desolation. So that's about maybe 3.5 years later. So now we notice it's the same thing. Thus we know that's the abomination of the desolation. The statue of the Olympian Zeus, I think in Maccabees 2, that's what it will be called. So Maccabees 2 will identify this as a statue of the Olympian Zeus. You say, why do they call it abomination of the desolation? Because it's another play on words. Probably translated into Hebrew, the abomination of the desolation came out to sound something like the statue of the Olympian Zeus in Greek. It's like saying Joe Schmo. In your own language, you can make it sound like something really awful. Instead of saying Olympian Zeus, then some similar sounding word in Hebrew. I don't know the two languages well enough to go further than that for you. But you can imagine why they got that. Above the altar, and altars were built all around like that. And books of the law that came to light were torn up. Anyone possessing a copy of the covenant or practicing the law, so is this pro-law? Yeah, totally. And what's going to happen is both Maccabee books, dying for the law, is going to become a rule of thumb. And therefore, martyrdom is going to take root in this period. So I think we can start linking up in a moment Daniel's saints of the Most High God with what's going to happen here. On the 25th of the month, funny, that's Christmas if you like, sacrifice was all offered to the altar erected over the altar. Here we go. Women who had children circumcised were put to death according to the edict, with their babies hung around their necks. And the members of their household and those who performed the circumcision executed. So look, when Paul heaps abuse on circumcision, he's flying in the face of people who have been gone to their death for this thing. Now, I don't say who's right or wrong. I don't care who's right or wrong. We're talking about how people feel and how they see something. So, he's really, treading on very sensitive stuff. He can do that in Asia Minor, he can do it in Greece, he can do it in Rome, he can do it in Ireland, he can do it up in Denmark, he can do it in Russia, he can do it anywhere he likes because people don't care. But in Palestine, with this history of 2 centuries, no, you can't do it. You can't speak like he speaks in Galatians. You can't do it, because then people are going to want to kill you. And that's exactly what the Book of Acts shows people. Not everyone. They don't want to kill James. They don't want to kill. They say in the Book of Acts, with an oath we have cursed ourselves not to eat or drink till we have killed Paul. Who are those people? Nazarite, temporary Nazarite oath, zealots taking a Nazarite oath. Do I believe that material in Acts? It's around, I forget where it is in Acts, somewhere around Acts 22 or so. Yeah, I believe that. I think that's exactly what would have happened to him, given the kind of things he was saying. But you see, in the Book of Acts, James is functioning in the temple when it's only Paul who's being attacked. James is not being attacked by anyone at that point. This is around 55, 56, 57. James, as I've tried to tell you, the leader of the early church, of the family of Jesus, as it were, whoever Jesus was, and so on, your view or my view or whatever view. but James is the leader in Galatians and in the book of Acts in the 50s and the 60s. They're fine. They're not having any trouble. In fact, I read you that. If I didn't, I'll read it again, but I'm sure I did. Acts 21:21. But you see, Paul, we have many people here, all zealots for the law. This is James speaking to Paul on his last trip up to Jerusalem. Let's see, Acts 21:21. Let's see, this is a very bad translation. I'll use my other one here. I like to have some Greek one at my disposal so I can look up something if it's, you know, a bad translation or something. Here it is. After the days, we packed our baggage. They were down on the coast. They'd come from the Greek lands to get to Jerusalem in time for what's called Pentecost, which is a big festival of rededication to the law in the Dead Sea Scrolls. From Cyprus, from Caesarea, we arrived in Jerusalem 21:17, and the brothers gladly welcomed us. So they're not having any trouble this time. On the next day, Paul went in with us to see James. This is the we document, third person. Someone else is writing this, probably a travel document of a guy called Lucius of Cyrene, perhaps. And it begins around chapter 16 in Acts and carries around to the end. This is a very reliable information in Acts, much different than the early part of Acts. No miraculous things, nothing, you know, incredible, just down to earth. We did this, we said that, he said that, we went here, we went there. You know, just what you'd expect to see in a travel diary. And on the next day, Paul went in with us to see James, and all the elders, Presbyterian, were there. And greeting him, he told them of the wonders God had worked among the Gentiles through his ministry, and he glorified God. And they said to him, meaning James is their spokesman, "You see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and all are zealots for the law." So they say back to him, they heard, and they glorified God, but they said to him, James, no doubt speaking as the leader, "You see, brother, there are many Jews here who believe, but they're all zealots for the law." So these are zealots. "And as to you, we've been told that you teach of falling away from Moses, telling all the Jews among the Gentiles not to circumcise their children." There we go. That's the head of the church saying that. It's not me saying it, or the author of Maccabees. That's the head of the church, James, saying that. You're teaching against circumcision. You can't do that. He's saying to Paul, that's in the official document here. Most people don't read this, as you are aware. Acts 21:21. "Or to walk in our ways." There's the ways. You teach them not. And look what's going to happen. "A crowd will surely come, and they will hear you have come. And so here's what we tell you." This is James speaking royally. And this is very down to earth, you see. This is not fantastic. "There are 4 men who have with us who have a vow, a temporary Nazarite oath. And you be purified with them. Since you've raised a lot of money, as we see in his letters in Thessalonians and elsewhere, he turns one community against the other. He says he doesn't want to go up to Jerusalem without money. And he's raised a lot of money. So he's perceived as having money. You pay their expenses so they can shave their heads. Shaving the heads, just like Mecca. After the pilgrimage, you shave your head after the Hajj. The Jews used to do that in the temple after they took a Nazarite oath. Shave their heads. So that all may know the things they've been told about you are not so. But you yourself still walk regularly keeping the law. But he doesn't. And we know he doesn't from his writings. He mocks and makes fun of the law. Well, I'm not saying he should or he shouldn't. I'm just saying, if I was an honorable man, and if someone said that to me, I'd say, no, I can't do that. I don't regularly keep the law. Sorry. Oh, no. Nothing loath, Paul goes in to show that he regularly keeps the law, even though we know he doesn't. And then James repeats what he wrote in chapter 15 to keep themselves from things sacrificed to idols, blood. You see, blood, if there was such a thing as communion with the blood of Christ, James wouldn't be forbidding blood. And what is strangled and fornication, and so on. Anyway, we'll get that another time. Then taking the men on the next day, Paul purified himself and went into the temple, so as to declare the fulfillment of the days. And when after 7 days some Jews from Asia Minor, Turkey, saw him. Why? They know what he's doing in Asia Minor. We see in Acts what he's doing. He's going to every synagogue and preaching against the law. So, and so they see him. And then, of course, Acts is on Paul's side, not on these people who see him side. Okay, let's be beyond the people who see him side, at least for argument's sake. Again, I don't really care which side you're on, just to get the history straight. And but this is why they see him in the temple. They stir up the people, lay hands on him, cry out, "Man, Israelites, help!" But this is so real, you can be sure that this is actually now not literature, or this is actually some history here. Help! This is the man who teaches all everywhere against the people, against the law, and against this place. Well, that's true. And besides, he's brought Greeks into the temple, and he has defiled this holy place. Now, the question of whether he has or hasn't, that's another thing you'd have to decide for yourself. But Acts explains it. Acts then stops and says, look, they had seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, whom they supposed Paul brought into the temple, but really he didn't do that, Acts is basically saying. Anyway, they seized Paul, they dragged him outside the temple, and they barred the doors behind him. And then Paul makes a speech and is rescued by the Roman centurions and so on and so forth. But that's Acts' presentation, but I'm interested in whether that's still accurate or not, or vice versa. What's interesting is that the most of the people in the church in Jerusalem are zealots for the law. And now we're going to hear what the zealot movement is in the Maccabees books. And James is the leader of those of the circumcision according to Galatians. And he's the one telling Paul that our followers are zealots for the law. So you see, that's what it's all about from the beginning to the end in early Christianity. Those for the law and those against the law. We know the parties that won out, but the scrolls represent a messianic zealotry for the law. So let's go back here. I'm not saying what you should observe or believe or practice. That's a private matter. That is your business. So they chose death rather than they refused unclean food. They stood firm. The Damascus Document is going to say, stand firm all the time. And they were executed. It was a dreadful wrath, that's the Daniel thing, visited upon Israel. So this basically fits in with what we've heard. Now we get the uprising. 2. In those days, Matthias, son of John, son of Simeon, notice the Christian names here, John, Simon, and so on. Names, I mean, that we hear in Christian scripture all of the time. Matthew. If the early Christians weren't happy about the Maccabean movement, why were they using so many Maccabean names? They're all using these Maccabean names. Judas, Matthew, John, Simon, and so on. That's almost all the names you always hear. Also Miriam. Miriam is the beloved Maccabean princess whom Herod kills. Forced her to marry him, it's in Josephus, and then he executes her and her children and the children he had by her, because the crowd preferred them to him because they preferred the Maccabeans to the Herodians. Let me just get this if I can here. You want to go home soon? Anyway, so when he saw the blasphemies being committed in Judah and Jerusalem, this Maccabeus, this Matthias, who had 5 sons, Simon, Judas, called Maccabeus, Eleazar, that's Lazarus, and so on. He cried, that is Matthias, alas, that I have witnessed these things, the temple in ruins, the vessels carried off, etc. Everything snatched from her, her former freedom, now slavery. See, freedom and slavery different there than in Galatians. Freedom was previously observing the law, now slavery is not observing. So Matthias tore his garments. The king's messengers came to the place that he was located, Modi'in. line 16, Modein. It's down at where the hills start coming up from the coastal plain in Palestine. You know, it's just as the hills begin. You can go to the Maccabean tombs there in Modein even today. You can see them. That's where the family was buried, supposedly. So this king's messenger came to there, and Matthias, he wants people to be reckoned as friends of the king and get presents from the king. And Matthias is quoted here, even if every nation living in the king's dominion obeys him, forsaking his ancestral religion to conform to his degree, I, my sons, and my brothers will still follow the covenant of our ancestors. There it is. In the scrolls, it's the covenant of the first. The New Testament, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. In the scrolls, the covenant of the ancestors, the covenant of the first. The Brit Harishanim, in case you're following the Hebrew. So, so when the king, we will not forsake the law and observances. We will follow them. We will not swerve from either to the right or to the left. Well, that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls over and over again. Not swerving from the right to the left. I can show it to you in 3 or 4 different documents. The actual language there. So then he was fired with zeal. First mention of zeal. First beginning of what we call the Zealot movement. This is the beginning of the Zealot movement.
What chapter are you on?
I'm in chapter 2, line 24. One of the king's messengers, I don't know if this is real or imaginary, slaughters him on the altar, this messenger who was going to enforce this sacrifice of a pig or something. And in his zeal for the law, repeated in 26, he acted as Phinehas did against Zimri, son of Saul. Then Matthias went through the town, shouting at the top of his voice, let everyone who has zeal for the law and takes his stand on the covenant come out and follow me. Then he fled with his sons into the hills, leaving all their possessions in the town. Okay, now look. What did Phinehas get for his zeal for the law? You remember? It's Numbers 25:6, I think. In any case, I'm not going to go there. What did he get? Because I'm not recommending this behavior. I'm just giving you the mindset. We are in Mecca almost here. Okay? I don't think we're quite in Bin Laden land, but we're in Mecca anyway. Mecca owes a lot to this movement. They don't know that, but they don't want me to. They don't listen to me and not tell them that. But you know, they don't know very much about the origins of their movement. Never mind. Don't want them to behead me like Salman Rushdie or somebody. I'll just keep quiet here. Who's that journalist that they got? What's his name? The one they're always having concerts in his name and everything from Los Angeles here. The one they made a movie about. Yeah, that one. I don't want to get in his situation, but yeah, I wouldn't be out in Pakistan doing what he was doing, frankly. Anyway, Phinehas, they were intermarrying with outsiders, and Phinehas slew the people who were doing that in the camp. And then Numbers says, in return for his zeal for God, Phinehas received the covenant of the high priesthood in perpetuity. Phinehas was the grandson, supposedly, of Aaron. Because Aaron, Eleazar, Phinehas. So out of zeal for the law, so now we are getting a claim for the zealot priesthood of the Maccabees. Now, if you think this is usurpation of the high priesthood, I think you're wrong. The Maccabean books are telling us why the Maccabean priesthood is legitimate. Not only is it legitimate because they have the zeal of Phinehas, but it's legitimate because they're from the first priestly course, Yoyarib. Remember when he was introduced, it said in 2:1, from the course of Yoyarib. You say, what are the courses? There were 24 priestly courses. I'm trying to jam a lot in here. I apologize for not taking questions. There's just so much to try to crush in here. We'll try to slow down, but we're just so far behind here. 24 priestly courses are in the book of Chronicles. And I think because of 24 hours in a day, each course had a certain hour in the temple, take care of things, clean up, sacrifice, do whatever needed to be done. And the first principal one is Joyarib. So the Maccabees, whoever, see, it was Frank Moore Cross at Harvard who first made the claim, and everyone then ran in and fell behind him. Princeton, Harvard, Oxford, the whole place. You know, that it still goes on today. Cross is emeritus at Harvard, but he's still around. And he had a very elegant book, The Ancient Library at Qumran, written in the 50s, which I followed as the Bible until I started teaching things myself and saw the weaknesses in what he was presenting. He was a scholar of the Old Testament. 10th century BC was his specialty, the Canaanite period. He wrote a book, I think, called Yahweh and the Gods of Canaan. But in any case, he was very big in that old period way back then. But he didn't, mind you, know a lot about Christian origins. And he didn't connect this to Christian origins at all. So he was interested in paleography and things like that. So he came up with the theory that the reason that the Maccabees that the priests are viewed this way is because they thought the Maccabees had usurped the high priesthood. Well, this book says they didn't think that the Maccabees had usurped the high priesthood. And that's all from him, that idea that they usurped the high priesthood. It's not written anywhere. No Jew thinks that. Josephus doesn't even think that. He's very proud, he's got Maccabean blood, he's very proud of his Maccabean blood. Now, there are people who are not considered legitimate priests, and those are from the Herodian period, but not in this period. I have to just do one other thing. There are people, by the way, who won't fight on the Sabbath. In any case, soon they are joined, line 42, by a community of Hasideans, 1S, stout fighting men, each a volunteer on the side of the law. And they organized an armed force, striking down sinners in their anger and the renegades in their fury. They overthrew the altar and forcibly circumcised all boys they found uncircumcised in the territories of Israel. Now this is pretty extreme, but this is Hasideans, and we're going to have a different view of this as we go on here. Finally, in Matthias' last will and testament, he once more talks about Phinehas, line 54. Phinehas, our father, in return for his burning zeal, received the covenant of the everlasting priesthood. Now that's absolutely true. But before you go, one last thing. Look at Maccabees 2. Maccabees 2 is not a second continuation of Maccabees 1. It's a parallel book. And its view of the history is different. Maccabees 2 starts with a letter from Jerusalem to the Jews in Egypt, proclaiming Hanukkah as a new festival of tabernacles, moved, line 9, to the month of Kislev. The reason Hanukkah has 8 days is because it's a festival of tabernacles that's been moved to Kislev. I'm going to pick this up next time. But the point here is that in this epitome that we have here, there is no Mattathias. There's a previous high priest, and then there is Judas. And then this book ends before Judas dies. This book is not interested in the Maccabean family. It's not interested in all the descendants of Mattathias. Maccabees 1 is a family history. Maccabees 2 is a messianic zealot history of Judas only. And the point is that Maccabees 1 is legitimatizing all the Maccabees. So there may be some issues there, but notice one interesting note here. 2:13 in Maccabees 2. In addition to the above, it was recorded both in the archives of the memoirs of Nehemiah, how he founded a library and made a collection of the books dealing with the kings and prophets. In the same way, Judas made a complete collection of the books dispersed in the late war, and these we still have, writing to the Jews in Egypt. And if you need them, send someone to fetch copies for them, of them. What it says here, first of all, we'll talk about it more next time, is that Nehemiah collected the Bible as we know it. That was scattered in the wars that we had in the last 2 centuries. Judas recollected the materials. So the Jewish Bible as we know it is actually dependent upon or a product of Judas Maccabee according to this presentation. Do I believe that? I think there's a lot to recommend that when we pick up the next one. Sorry to keep you late, I won't keep going. I think I will anyway. Sorry, I do apologize. I know you want to get out of here.